Guilty verdicts for all. A court in southern France sentencing Dominique Pelicot along with the 50 co-defendants he invited over the internet into the family home to rape his drugged wife. The 72-year-old pensioner got the maximum, 20 years. We'll ask what the last 3.5 months have revealed. First, about the courage of his ex-wife, Jazelle Pelicot, who opted to go public, attending every day of the 3.5-month trial, saying shame was for her predators. Less than 1/3 of those defendants who expressed remorse in their closing statement. Is the verdict a triumph for victims the world over? Or does it challenge also the presumption that after Me Too, women's rights can only progress? After all, the evidence was posted online for years before police or the victim caught wind of what was playing out in the sleepy Provence village of Mazan. Today in the France 24 debate, what lessons from this mass rape trial? And with us, attorney Coraline Duménil, spokesperson for the Fondation des Femmes advocacy group. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks as well to Sarah McGrath, CEO of Women for Women France. One of your tasks, you say, is you have a multilingual hotline for victims of domestic abuse.
Yeah, that's right. Women for Women France manages the online resource centre, which is available in 16 languages, and that's available to all victims of domestic abuse in France and the professionals that accompany them.
Sociologist Clara Le Gallic-Ash, you researches digital inequality and gender-based violence. Your thesis, an analysis of testimonies in the Twitter era, and on Twitter in the era of Me Too here in France. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
And good to see author and journalist Linda Hervieux, who's covered the Mazan trial for NBC News. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
If you're on the go, by the way, you can always listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, the gavel going down inside the Avignon courthouse with guilty verdicts, a range of sentences, and, well, stirring cheers outside for a woman who's become a national heroine. Siobhan Silk has more.
The woman who walked into court throughout this trial with her head held high walked out after the verdicts the same way. Jazelle Pelicot, a picture of courage and resilience after a decade of druggings and brutal rapes at the bidding of her then husband, then a gruelling 3.5-month trial under the eyes of the world.
I want to express a most profound gratitude to all those who have supported me throughout this ordeal. Your stories have moved me deeply, and they've given me the strength needed to return day after day for these long hearings.
On Thursday, the verdicts finally came. Jazelle's ex-husband, Dominique Pelicot, was found guilty and handed the maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. His 50 co-accused, 50 strangers whom Pelicot recruited to rape his then wife, also all found guilty on charges of rape, attempted rape or sexual assault. Their sentences range from 3 to 15 years, with some partially suspended. A disappointment to the prosecution, who had demanded prison terms of up to 18 years.
The sentences were reduced, and it's a good thing. I continue to think that Dominique Pelicot's ultimate crime is to have brought down with him 50 men who are not meant to find themselves here today.
Jazelle Pelicot said she respected the court's decision, but her supporters are bitterly disappointed by what they see as light punishments.
It makes a mockery of everyone, a mockery of us, and a mockery of sexist and sexual violence. I don't even have the words. We're completely disillusioned.
Even at this time, Jazelle Pelicot's thoughts are with other people who may be suffering in silence.
I think of the victims who have not been recognized, whose stories are often hidden. I want you to know that we share the same fight.
Her own story might have stayed in the shadows if not for her decision to waive her anonymity and allow the trial to be held in public.
By opening the doors of this trial on September 2nd, I wanted society to be a witness to the debates that took place. I have never regretted making this decision.
As the guilty men now begin their prison sentences, the enduring image of this trial will be the superhuman strength of Jazelle Pelicot, the survivor who became an icon.
Corinne Duménil, I wanted society to bear witness, she says in that clip we just saw. Does she have superhuman strength?
Yes, she does. She must be really congratulated, and I hope she will get some real time to rest and peace after this amazing marathon she basically ran before everyone. It's extremely hard for victims of rape to stand in court for such a long time. It's extremely hard to have your story told by someone else than you, extremely hard to tell your story again and again and again, and then to hear the comments of the perpetrator, of the accused, and also to hear the comments of the defense, who have not always been very tactful in this case, as in many cases.
And again, the evidence was online, and at one point the magistrate said, well, maybe we shouldn't show this. And she said, no, this has to be on in the minutes, in the record of the trial.
This is what is incredible about what Jazelle has done. I absolutely share that sentiment. It's so incredible that not only has she lived the extraordinary trauma of having her rights violated in the most horrific way by the man that she loved, but then to open up the court and go through that all over again. And I think that was very diplomatic that you said that it wasn't always tactful. I found some of the defence lawyer strategies hideous. And what's great about Jazelle having opened this up and being so strong to do so is we get to have an insight into what rape victims are faced with in the French tribunals. It's victim blaming. It's attacking their credibility. It's a really traumatic experience.
Is that just France, though?
Look, that does happen around the world, but we do think that France is particularly bad at this. There's things that can be done in the French courts of law that in some countries they've said, no, we can't do that anymore. So, for instance, just basically the confrontation with victims, we often do that in an investigation in France. That's really traumatic, but it's part of the French justice system.
Yeah, I want to get back to that point, but first, let me ask you about this, Clara, because in the closing statements we heard at the beginning of the week, less than 1/3 of those 50 co-defendants of Dominique Pelicot expressed remorse. Your thoughts on that? Is that they said, well, we didn't, we shouldn't, we're not sorry, we didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, and I think we talked a lot about it in France too, about how men should react. Of course, in the court, but also in France, all men should react. We have debate about not all men are guilty, of course, but I think all men should react, at least have empathy, and they don't even have empathy in this case. And that's really a big thing that we need to think about, that education needs to be better on this point. Only first to have empathy, I think it's a big thing. It's not a big thing to ask to people, but we see here that it's not even there in a court after a few months of a big trial. They do not even have empathy, and that's a big thing.
They don't have empathy, you think, or it's their defense strategy?
I think if they do not say that they have empathy, I think they know that it could be also maybe be good for them in the trial to say that they have empathy. Maybe their lawyers told them not to say that, but it's a lot of them that did not express words to Jazelle Pelicot, so at least some of them, I think, are honest about what they're saying, and it's not only a strategy in what they say.
Okay, not only a strategy. Lynn Dervieux, you started working on this long before the actual trial began in September. Did you know it was going to have this kind of worldwide resonance?
I don't think anybody knew that this trial was going to just ricochet around the world with attention. You have almost 200 journalists accredited to cover this trial. It was not only staggering in France, but I really think it was staggering everywhere, because not only did we see this incredibly strong woman who we literally saw her taking off her sunglasses and emerging into the light and sharing her story. But we saw the opposite with these men who, as you pointed out, did not show empathy. It was, in fact, court investigators, psychologists, who also found that these men lacked empathy as they shrunk, as they hid behind masks, as they pulled their hoodies over their heads, and literally even today shrinking from the cameras. So it was quite a contrast that I think was quite something to watch.
Clara, how do you explain that hiding and that shrinking?
Well, I think, of course, the media coverage is unusual. So we can also think that for them it can be, of course, unusual. So that's a part of the explanation. But as we say, even the expertise say that they do not show empathy, that they really worked together. I mean, they were laughing together. They were expressing words against the journalists, the feminists. So it's really, they didn't hide their behaviors, and so it's hard to explain. But yeah, Thara, maybe you have something to.
Well, because and just to add to that, they came from all different social classes and all different ages. These men who've been found guilty.
And they always do. And they always do. And that's one myth that has to go away, that perpetrators are these monsters, strange men lurking in a corner. No, these are men that we know. These are men that we work with. These are men that we live next to. These are men that we love. These are men in our families. And they're just your average man. The one thing that all of these perpetrators have in common is their gender. 1 in 3 women are experiencing domestic abuse or sexual violence in their lifetime. That means a lot of men are committing these crimes. And that's what this court case has really shown us as well, is the need for men outside of the courtroom, so not just the perpetrators, but all of the good guys who are convinced they would never harm a woman, or they haven't. We need them to step up, and we need them to lead the charge, because this is a men's problem. Male violence is a men's problem, and it's impacting women. So to fix this problem, we need men to really step up and lead the change.
I'm a rapist like the others in this room, said Dominique Pelicot at the start of the trial, thus, in his defense strategy, dismissing that there were those who could talk about attenuating circumstances, instead insisting they were all in the same boat. He got the harshest verdict, 20 years. His lawyer using a kind of musical metaphor to criticize the sentence.
I
said at the beginning of the proceedings that Mr. Pelicot was not necessarily the conductor and the others were not his musicians. However, I think with this verdict, the court has indeed condemned the conductor. They've marked a difference between him and the various musicians who make up this orchestra. We're not authorized to criticize a court decision. The only way we can contest it is to appeal.
Coraline Duménil, that brings us to what we saw in that report at the beginning. The variation in what is a just sentence, because some people got 3 years and he got 20.
Right. It's pretty impossible to answer this question. What we need to know is that in France, we don't have compulsory guidelines, which you do have in some court of law around the world. In France, we are going to consider the personality of the person. So we're going to look at social background, employment, social stability, family, all of these. And these are going to be considered when designing a sentence. So I cannot go into the details because we don't have all the details, but in order to look at the difference in sentences, you will have to look at the fact, whether or not the person recognized or not what he did, whether he recognized honestly, showing remorse, showing understanding, empathy, as Clara was saying. Apparently, not many of them did genuinely show empathy. And that actually really should ring a bell, not only in France, but around the world. Like, where are these guys coming from? We know they are Mr. Everybody. And this is very scary. And we need to think about Mr. Everybody and draw the conclusion from
So
it.
you agree with the defense attorney? It's not that he's the ringleader and the others are simply going along with it.
Oh, no, I don't necessarily agree with her. No, not on that. I think what they did is horrifying, and Jazelle Pelicot really coined it when she said, how could a person leave this room after having seen this person absolutely inert and not run away to the police? This is a real question of this case. Why don't you do something?
And on that point, the only defendant who did not rape Jazelle Pelicot was Jean-Pierre Maréchal, a 63-year-old pensioner described as Dominique Pelicot's disciple. He turned to him for advice and followed his protocols for administering these so-called date rape drugs on his own wife. He will not be appealing, says his attorney.
Those who apologized, those who expressed regret and truthfully said that what they have done was abominable, like Jean-Pierre Maréchal, were treated as such. Here is a man for whom the verdict that I will not appeal partially restores his image and his place within his family, and who will continue to tread the path of rehabilitation.
Okay, so what he did was abominable, says his attorney, but this partially, he's getting 12-year sentence. This partially restores his image, the fact that he owns up to it. Do you agree with that?
Well, it's hard to say when I'm not a lawyer, but yeah, I think, well, it's crazy. This case is very crazy to see that in those perpetrators, that there is an example, and that I agree with the thing that no one went to the police and they went to their own house to do the same thing. That's just a crazy thing to notice, that it's not even about reporting and to notice what happened, but even to reproduce what happened in that house. So obviously it's crazy about the years that he had and everything. I don't have my own opinion on that, but I think it's just crazy. Yeah, no
Is this
report.
a new danger for the digital age? Because it was over the internet that he invited men,
Yeah, I think.
but they were all within a 60-kilometer radius of Mazan.
Yeah, I think it shows that the online and the offline worlds really worked together. And that's why we say, when we study on Twitter what happened, the victims don't talk about violence online, they talk about violence offline, about old cases, about incest that happened in the childhood, and they report it online and they don't report it to the police. Those reports, violence, offline and online really work together, and we need to look at both, the report online and the violence online, but also offline, and that's a good example.
Linda Arvieux, you interviewed a 33-year-old woman who endured hell at the hands of her violent ex-husband. Latika said she learned the man she met at age 17, the father of her children, had been feeding her drugs for years. This is unrelated to the Mazan trial, and so that shows that what was uncovered with this trial is possibly happening in a lot of places?
Well, Latika said it was because of Jazelle that she had the courage to speak out about that, and she's not the only one. One of the main issues that's coming out of this case is the idea of chemical submission, which is often called date rape drugging in the U.S. certainly, and it's this trial has really put a spotlight on that, because in France it's not typical to test for this type, whether these drugs were in the system of a victim when she comes in, and that is one of the things that activists for these organizations here tonight and elsewhere in France are trying to change. They're calling for a systematic change where we can address this idea of chemical submission, of drugging women, and have that part of the procedures, because they are saying it's far more common. We don't have numbers on it because it's not something that anyone is checking for. But with Latika and other women I spoke to, it's far more common than anyone thinks. And that was quite shocking.
Did you get a sense that this was something that's always existed? Date rape drugs existed when I was young. Or is it something that's actually growing, again, thanks to the internet?
Well, the people who are studying this say we've always had, as far back as Greek mythology, this idea of drugging women, sleeping beauty fantasies, fairy tales. And so this idea of this, and it was cited in this trial, this sleeping beauty scenario. Some of these men felt they were living out fantasies. Drugging of women has always occurred to some degree. We have powerful drugs now. How was Dominique Pelicot able to get all of those antidepressant drugs, anti-anxiety drugs that he crushed into his wife's food? Same thing with Letika's husband. He drugged her tea, and it was only when she didn't drink her tea one night and woke up in the middle of an assault that she realized what was happening. And that is just staggering that that's going on. And Dominique Pelicot learned how to do this on that now defunct website we spoke of, where he invited all of these men to join in and taught them how to do it. So the internet certainly makes it easier. It raises challenges out there, raises challenges to the criminal justice system. How are you going to confront this?
What do the studies show? What's the trend, Sarah McGrath?
Well, look, I think this all points to one clear need, is that we need to really, really look at how we are treating sexual and sexist violence in France from when the victims comes forward through to the end. Now, women in France simply don't trust the justice system. We've only got 10% of all rape victims in France who even go to the justice and report it.
But the numbers have soared in the last 10 years.
Of rapes or
of
reports?
People reporting, of having the courage to go to the police station.
There has been an increase because we have, and the organisation's presence today, we've done a lot of work of promoting how to do that. However, the justice system is still failing women, because when they do come forward, we know that so few reports are even properly investigated. We get reports all the time that names of witnesses are given to police officers, and those witnesses are never even contacted, and then the prosecutor just drops the case. That is unacceptable. That is unacceptable.
Go on in Dominique.
Yeah, regarding the investigation, a lot can be done, but it takes forever to do it. Like, for instance, in this case, this guy was stopped because he was found in a supermarket. The security guard called him a disgusting person. Like, this guy,
he was upskirting, what they call, yeah.
This guy really made sense. Like, he was a very down-to-earth person. You just saw this person taking pictures of women and just reacted immediately, like the guys we would like to see everywhere, right? And then regarding the investigation, in many of the cases where women report, we want to have an expertise of all the digital devices of those perpetrators. A lot of Dominique Pelicot are still around there because we haven't seized the laptop and done the investigation. We seized the laptop a month after this guy has been interrogated. This is a joke. We need to act thoroughly and immediately.
And the glass half full might be the fact that because there's all this evidence that he put out over the internet, we did get 51 guilty verdicts.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is amazing here. But we have to do much more. And I'm thinking of all the women who filed a criminal complaint and for whom nothing happened. They received this letter saying it's classified. We don't have enough information. And when we get the investigation, we see that the investigation hasn't been done properly, meaning we don't have the expertise of the laptop or the phone. If we had this, we would have found all those images.
And the pressure is growing to make it easier for that to get into the hands of investigators?
Yeah, the good thing is that they have the power to do it. They have the means to do it. The Code of Criminal Proceeding allows them to do it. Lawyers are now sitting on their back to get it done. So I'm hopeful. And the organization I'm working for and speaking for tonight has supported a proposal of 140 measures to really change the life of women victims of sexual violence in France. It's 140 practical things to do, from prevention to the legal system, down the years to tackling issues of rape culture. And we hope these measures are going to be taken seriously, studied, and implemented.
When France 24's team went to Mazan this week, most in that sleepy village of 7,000 at the foot of Mont Ventoux had had enough of media attention and shied away from the camera. Still, a few did agree to speak.
It really shook me, and I'm disgusted. It happened less than 1 kilometer away from my home. It's a road I take every day, so it took me quite some time to realize it, and I still cannot. I'm disgusted that it's possible to do such a thing. And on top of that, probably I've crossed most of the rapists who have done that.
People who are capable of doing that, fathers of families, it's sad. That's why the people of Mazan are ashamed, but I believe that justice will be served.
And that was earlier this week. Lynn Dervieux, this village, it's in a picturesque area.
It is a picture postcard Provençal village. And when I went there at the very start of the trial, there was a lot of hostility already toward us, the media, for asking questions, but also because the Pelicots were seen, even though they lived there for a number of years in their retirement, they were seen as people who weren't from there. Thus,
they moved there 9 years ago, I think.
Yeah, giving a black eye to the town. But a lot of the people I talked to and were saying that, well, there isn't such a thing as rape culture in France, which is what a lot of women said this trial highlighted, a culture that tolerates rape. A lot of people were hostile to that, but one young woman who runs a cafe in town was just shaking her head as those older women were talking to me. And she said, we are all watching this because this is going to change things. And everything that Jazelle says is absolutely true.
So this was a conversation between women?
Yeah. And it was interesting because, well, it was the media invading this town, and, there was, I think, a tendency, and I think your team probably found it too, to not want to talk to us, to want to defend the town, to want to say, as we say, this man must be a monster, this isn't a normal thing. But, as I said, one young woman who overheard this later said, no, this is absolutely how it is here, and maybe this will change. And I think that's what a lot of women, not just activists, are saying that they hope will happen.
All right, so Coraline Duménil, they're talking about measures going forward when it comes to listening to the victims and making sure that evidence can be brought forward to go to trial. It should be said that, again, if less than 1/3 of the defendants expressed remorse in their closing statements, their lawyers point out it's because there's another issue, and this is a central one here in France. The country doesn't have, like Spain's only yes means yes sexual consent law.
As soon as there is a criminal intent, as soon as there is proof that the person who committed the acts of rape was aware of committing the acts of rape, there is rape. Otherwise, there is no rape. And that's what we've been saying from the outset for all our clients.
Otherwise, there is no rape.
I mean, if we looked at it in this way, we would never convict any rapist. He would always say, I didn't intend to rape her. I mean, of course. So the organization in France working against rape is called CFCV, Collectif Féministe contre le Viol, and they have been basically studying how perpetrators operate and studying precisely what generally we see. So we know what they do, and we need to look at all those acts that the perpetrators have done in order to get to what they want, which is a sexual penetration with constraint, violence, threat, or surprise.
That's the French law.
We don't ever consent to rape. We may consent to a sexual intercourse. You don't consent to a crime. So we need to look at what they do. Do they threaten her? Are they violent against her? Do they surprise her? This is the elements of rape, and this is a real problem with rape. And we kind of believe that consent is going to solve the world. It won't.
So you're saying no actual new law is needed?
No, what we need is to enforce a comprehensive framework, and the feminist organizations have worked on this. They have proposed 140 measures to really make the life of women victims of sexual assault different and hopefully better.
So do you agree, or does France need a only yes means yes kind of law like they have in Spain? Sarah McGrath.
Well, look, France is actually legally obligated to put that into the law. They did ratify the Istanbul Convention, which does say that we need to have the notion of consent in law. However, I'm very respectful of the debate which is ongoing in the feminist legal circuit at the moment. But it needs to be a lot more simple than that. It needs to be very clear.
All right, so make it simple for us then.
Okay. Without clearly expressed consent, it is rape. That's it. If you haven't received an expressed, verbalized, or expressed consent, and you go forward with an act, it is rape, or it could be sexual assault as well. That's how simple it is. And unfortunately, in the French culture, we don't see that being taught. We don't see that being discussed. Our sector is a bit responsible for that as well, because we're not promoting the notion of consent at the moment, because there is this big, very tense debate about whether we should have it in the law or not. So we're not out there promoting and educating young boys and educating men about consent, whereas our neighbours are all talking about consent. It's such common knowledge. So France is really behind on this.
Is that changing, though? Clara Le Gallicache?
Yeah, I think it's changing because...
Are young people being taught about consent?
Well, I think we hear about it, and young students, young people hear about it, and it's kind of new in France. We did not talk about consent before, so it's already a change. To put it in the law, I don't have a clear opinion about it, but I think in the education, it needs to be clear to educate about consent, and not only to hear it on media when there is a big trial. There have been big trials in France for the past month and year, so we hear a little bit about it, but it needs to be clearer and in the education of girls and boys.
Do you think a law is needed?
Honestly, I'm not sure if a law is needed. What is needed is to have more means to actually use the law that we have now, because I think in many trials, maybe the notion of consent will be useful, but actually what is surprising too is that in that trial, the notion of consent would have maybe easy some debate, but it wasn't needed. So it's a bit surprising that the debate arrived now, because it wasn't a big thing in that trial.
It didn't stop them from being convicted, is what you're saying?
Yeah, they have all been they're all guilty.
But when you hear that defense lawyer, forgive me for interrupting, saying it's not rape.
Yeah, obviously intentionality is the baseline of a crime, and it's a lawyer. So I think it is a shocking sentence, but many shocking sentences have been said by lawyers. So it's just one more. It's not a good thing, but I mean, they are guilty today. So that's the result. That's the thing we need to remember. And I think the consent debate will keep on going, because the former Minister of Justice wanted to put it in the law. We'll have a new government, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. We'll see who's the new Minister of Justice. There's been debate about it in Europe too, and France was against it. So it's not solved yet, and debates are really not easy about it, I think, especially in France, where there are many contradictory opinions.
Linda Arvieux, are the French really behind the times when it comes to their European neighbours? You heard Sarah stating that they should already have this stipulated, since the signatories of that international treaty, the Istanbul Convention, or is this or is it not an outlier?
Well, one thing to remember, there are a lot of statistics out there that show how important it is to start education young on this matter. There's one statistic that came out last year that 1/4 of young men between 25 and 35 think that a show of violence is necessary sometimes to show strength, that's rather shocking. And the people that I talk to, from high school teachers to parents to young women, say that there isn't this idea of teaching the idea of what's masculine and which we would think would imply
Here in France,
consent. Yes, in France. Is France behind? That's what I'm told. That's what we seem to be seeing. How are these lawyers? It's a defense lawyer's job to defend the client, but how were lawyers like the one whose clip you just showed? How were they so able to use this idea of intent and consent and say, well, it couldn't be rape? And also remember, they also said that Dominique Pelicot consented to the act. So it was enough to have a husband's consent. That is shocking that you would say that in a court, that the husband consented, so that's enough. And literally they said that's enough. And sometimes the lawyers indicated to reporters that their clients weren't so smart, so maybe you don't want to ask them those questions. But honestly, it was shocking to hear those statements.
Okay, so we've been around the room, Coraline Duménil. When you've heard the other panelists, how about a law? Just maybe, not needed.
Let's go to Stanford. Let's go to California. Brock Turner case, 2015. Mm-hmm. This student raped another student who was unconscious on the floor on the Stanford campus. He was convicted. California, you have yes means yes, no means no. He was convicted. How much was he sentenced to? What was the conviction? 6 months. And 3 months actually done. This is the Golden State, California. The problem is not consent. It is the constraint. And it's not because you are going to add consent to the French law that you are going to change the sentencing. So if that's what you care about, you need to think about it differently. So what we offer with the coalition, the feminist coalition, is this program, a comprehensive program, 140 things to do. It's so much more difficult than adding one word. And we've done the work. We laid it out.
Sarah McGrath?
Yeah, I don't accept that situation in California was got to do with the law specifically. I think there's obviously other bits in their justice system that arrived at such a law, at such a short sentencing. We can't just say, oh, because they had consent in their law, that's why there was a bad sentence. And I think why we sit around and have this debate in our sector, we're not educating the public. Although I must say, I wanted to point out one of the perpetrators did know about the notion of consent, because he made this comment, which really, there's a lot of terrible comments by the perpetrators. This one really stood out to me on consent. He said that he was the real victim because he didn't know that he was being filmed. So he didn't give his consent to being filmed, so he felt like a victim. But Jazelle didn't give him consent. So he's understood the notion of consent. He's just not wanting to apply it to women. And so we need to really be out there talking about consent non-stop. The debate will continue about whether it goes in the law or not. But while we're having that debate, I think our sector is actually holding up progress in the country.
Well, for instance, I have been doing training programs in high schools for 10 years. I've been talking about consent for 10 years to those kids. One of the problems that we see with this case is the pornography. We have a culture which is full of pornography. The brother of Dominique Pelicot said maybe one of the reasons why Dominique Pelicot changed that much was that he was consuming pornography about daily. So if we don't actually address this culture, consent or not, we won't change things.
There's kind of an ecosystem, isn't there, Clara Le Gallicage, with the all the discussions we had during the U.S. presidential race about toxic masculinity and echo chambers, and they're listening to what Sarah was just saying a minute ago and what's just been said here by Coraline. There's this idea that each echo chamber thinks they're right about things.
Yeah, of course. And I think, the comparison with the US is also interesting. And again, when we talk about online and offline and about the different generation, we see now we have different examples that these chambers can be in any country with people from any age, from men, mainly from any age, that spread masculinity, toxic masculinity, in a sense that is very violent. I mean, in the US, we have seen many examples of young guy on the internet saying very violent words against all women that would be there are women in the US, so they are in danger for those men that think they have the power to say those words on the internet, maybe offline, to threaten every woman. And I think that's also interesting to see these different ages, different generation, and sometimes it's offline, sometimes it's online, but it's always connected. It's a real danger, I think, for the next years, to really understand what's going on, and not only in physical violence, but also what people think they can say and what it says about themselves and the opinion that is spread on the internet and offline too.
Sarah McGrath, are younger people more aware of consent and these notions of what's the difference between online and offline, or less aware of it?
So this is really interesting, the youth. Very interesting. So what we've got a gender divide in Generation Z and below. So what we've seen is that with young women, their knowledge is a lot higher and they are much more pro-feminist and pro-women's rights than my generation, for instance. But the young men, unfortunately, have been swept up. A lot of young men, an increasing amount of young men, are showing higher rates of misogyny, according to a lot of surveys worldwide, and that a lot of that is because of these echo chambers that have been taken over by masculinists who are promoting violence against women in a really extreme way and promoting the control over women. Because this is what it comes down to, is men controlling women. And in French culture, that's part of it. We don't even have laws against coercive control in the country. That shows how far behind we are. We don't have one law against coercive control. And that shows where the mentality is about men being allowed to control women. For instance, when it comes to administrative abuse against foreign-born women living in the country, a French man has the right to say, do this or don't do this, or I'll leave you and you'll lose your right to residency. And he can make threats, and he can go just to making her becoming like undocumented. And there's no provision for that in the penal code. There's no provision for that from any of the feminist big organisations who are promoting measures and changes. It's really, really problematic. Control over women, that's what we're talking about here.
Control over women, and one woman who took control is, of course, Jazelle Pelicot. Before we go, let's listen to her again. She thanks supporters and the press for their coverage of the case. She expressed solidarity with victims, as we heard earlier. And then she also spoke of her own family.
This trial was a difficult ordeal. And in this moment, my thoughts go out to my 3 children, David, Caroline, and Florian. I also think of my grandchildren because they are the future. And it is also for them that I took on this fight. I also think of my daughters-in-law, Aurore and Céline. I also think of all the other families affected by this tragedy. Finally, I think of the victims who have not been recognized, whose stories are often hidden. I want you to know that we share the same fight.
And therein, perhaps, Lynn Dervieux, lies some of the reason why she's so brave, that she's not alone.
She's extraordinary. Imagine a woman who was victimized like that, who after almost 4 months of brutal testimony, seeing yourself in horrific positions, in video, in photos, denounced by lawyers and the men who abused you, she can stand like that today and give that kind of a statement. I've covered trials for many years, a lot of sexual assault trials. I've never seen a victim like her.
We'll have to leave it there. Lynn Dervieux, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank as well Sarah McGrath, Corinne Duménil, Clara Le Garrigue-Ash. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.